Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. Part 4. Black men and women who refuse to live under oppression are dangerous to white society because they become symbols of hope to their brothers and sisters, inspiring them to follow their example. Chapter 22. Introductory quote. The mobilization of the masses, when it arises out of the war of liberation, introduces into each man's consciousness the ideas of a common cause, of a national destiny, and of a collective history. In the same way, the second phase, that of the building up of the nation, is helped on by the existence of this cement which has been mixed with blood and anger. Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth. Nomo, Swahili for Power of the Word. Section, Raising Consciousness. The Black Panthers have always emphasized action over rhetoric. But language is the power of the word, in the philosophical sense, is not underestimated in our ideology. We recognize the significance of words in the struggle for liberation, not only in the media and in conversations with people on the block, but in the important area of raising consciousness. Words are another way of defining phenomena, and the definition of any phenomena is the first step to controlling it or being controlled by it. When I read Nietzsche's The Will to Power, I learned much from a number of his philosophical insights. This is not to say that I endorse all of Nietzsche, only that many of his ideas have influenced my thinking. Because Nietzsche was writing about concepts fundamental to all men, and particularly about the meaning of power, some of his ideas are pertinent to the way Black people live in the United States. They have had a great impact on the development of Black Panther philosophy. Nietzsche believed that beyond good and evil is the will to power. In other words, good and evil are labels for phenomena, or value judgments. Behind these value judgments is the will to power, which causes man to view phenomena as good or evil. It is really the will to power that controls our understanding of something, and not an inherent quality of good or evil. Man attempts to define phenomena in such a way that they reflect the interests of his own class or group. He gives titles or values to phenomena according to what he sees as beneficial. If it is to his advantage, something is called good, and if it is not beneficial, then it is defined as evil. Nietzsche shows how this reasoning was used by the German ruling circle, which always defined phenomena in terms complementary to the noble class. For example, they used the German word gut, which means godlike or good, to refer to themselves. Nobles were gut. On the other hand, the word Villain, used to describe the poor people and serfs who lived outside the great gates of the nobleman's home, suggested the opposite. The poor were said to come to live in the village, a word that comes from the same root word, Latin villa, as the term villain. So the ruling class, by the power they possessed, defined themselves as godlike, and called the people villains, or enemies of the ruling circle. Needless to say, when the poor and common people internalized these ideas, they felt inferior, guilty, and ashamed, while the nobles took their superiority for granted. Thought had been shaped by language. We have seen the same thing in the United States, where, over a period of time, the adjective black became a potent word in the American language, pejorative in every sense. We were made to feel ashamed and guilty because of our biological characteristics, while our oppressors, through their whiteness, felt noble and uplifted. In the past few years, however, and it has been only a few years, the rising level of consciousness within our Black communities has led us to redefine ourselves. People once ashamed to be called Black now gladly accept the label, and our biological characteristics are a source of pride. Today we call ourselves Black people and wear natural hairstyles because we have changed the definition of the word Black. This is an example of Nietzsche's theory that beyond good and evil is the will to power. In the early days of the Black Panthers, we tried to find ways to make this theory work best in the interest of Black people. Words could be used not only to make Blacks more proud, but to make whites question and even reject concepts they had always unthinkingly accepted. One of our prime needs was a new definition for policeman, a good descriptive word, one the community would accept and use, would not only advance Black consciousness, but in effect control the police by making them see themselves in a new light. We thought up new terms for them. At first, I figured that the reverse of God, dog, would be a good epithet, but it did not catch on. We tried beast, brute, and animal, but none of them captured the essential quality we were trying to convey. One day, while working on the paper, Eldritch showed us a postcard from Beverly Axelrod. On the front was the slogan, "Support your local police." There was a sheriff's star above the phrase, and in the center of the star was a grinning, slobbering pig. It was just what we were looking for. We began to show policemen as pigs in our cartoons, and from time to time use the word. Pig caught on. It entered the language. This was a form of psychological warfare. It raised the consciousness of the people, and also inflicted a new consciousness on the ruling circle. If whites and police became caught up in this new awareness, they would soon defect from their own ranks and join us to avoid feelings of guilt and shame. Nietzsche pointed out that this tactic had been used to good effect by the Christians against the Romans. In the beginning, the Christians were weak, but they understood how to make the philosophy of a weak group work for them. By using phrases like, "the meek shall inherit the earth," they imposed a new idea on the Romans, one that gave rise to doubt and led to defections to the new sect. Once Christians stated that the meek shall inherit the earth and won over members, they weakened the strength of those in power. They were to be the victors. People like to be on the winning side. We have seen the same principle work on college campuses in this country. Many white youths now identify with Blacks. The identification is manifested in clothes, rhetoric, and lifestyles. Thus, even though we came to the term pig accidentally, the choice itself was calculated. Pig was perfect for several reasons. First of all, words like swine, hog, sow, and pig have always had unpleasant connotations. The reason for this probably has theological roots, since the pig is considered an unclean animal in Semitic religions. In the English language, well-established pig epithets are numerous. We say that someone eats like a hog, is a filthy swine, and so on. In Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, James Joyce uses swine as a destructive, devouring image when he describes Ireland as an old sow that eats her farrow. So the word pig is traditionally associated with grotesque qualities. The pig in reality is an ugly and offensive animal. It likes to root around in the mud. It makes hideous noises. It does not seem to relate to humans as other animals do. Further, anyone in the black community can relate to the true characteristics of the pig, because most of us have come from rural backgrounds and have observed the nature of pigs. Many of the police, too, are hired right out of the South and are familiar with the behavior of pigs. They know exactly what the word implies. To call a policeman a pig conveys the idea of someone who is brutal, gross, and uncaring. Pig has another point in its favor. In racial terms, pig is a neutral word. Many white youths on college campuses really began to understand what the police were really like when their heads were broken open during demonstrations against the draft and the Vietnam War. This broadened the use of the term and served to unify the victims against their oppressors. Even though white youths were not victimized in the same way or to the same extent that we were, they nonetheless became our allies against the police. In this case, the ruling circle was not able to set the victims against each other, as the racists in the South had done by setting poor whites against blacks. Our greatest victory, however, lay in the effect on the police themselves. They did not like to be called pigs, and they still do not. Ever since the term came into use, they have conducted a counter-campaign by using slogans like "Pigs are beautiful" and wearing pig pins, but their effort has failed. Our message, of course, is that if they do not want to be pigs, then they ought to stop their brutalization of the victims of the world. No slogan will change the people's opinion. A change in behavior is the only thing that will do it. Another expression that helped to raise black people's consciousness is "all power to the people." An expression that has meaning on several levels: political, economic, and metaphysical. It was coined by the Black Panther Party around the same time as pig, and has also gained wide acceptance. When we created it, I had in mind some distinct philosophical goals for the community that many people did not understand. The police and the press wanted everyone to believe that we were nothing more than a bunch of young toughs, strutting around with guns in order to shock people. But Bobby and I always had a clear understanding of what we wanted to do. We wanted to give the community a wide variety of needed programs, and so we began in a way that would gain the community's support. At the same time, we saw the necessity of going beyond these first steps. In developing our newspaper, we were working towards our long-range goals of organizing the community around programs that the people would come to believe in strongly. We hoped these programs would come to mean so much that the people would take up guns for defense against any maneuvers by the oppressor. All these programs were aimed at one goal: complete control of the institutions in the community. Every ethnic group has particular needs that they know and understand better than anybody else. Each group is the best judge of how its institutions ought to affect the lives of its members. Throughout American history, ethnic groups like the Irish and Italians have established organizations and institutions within their own communities. When they achieved this political control, they had the power to deal with their problems. Yet there is still another necessary step. In the black community, mere control of our own institutions will not automatically solve the problem. For one thing, it is difficult to get enough places of work in the community to produce full employments for blacks. The most important element in controlling our own institutions would be to organize them into cooperatives, which would end all forms of exploitation. Then, the profits, or surplus, from the cooperatives would be returned to the community, expanding opportunities on all levels and enriching life. Beyond this, our ultimate aim is to have various ethnic communities cooperating in a spirit of mutual aid rather than competing. In this way, all communities would be allied in a common purpose through the major social, economic, and political institutions in the country. This is our long-range objective. Although we are far from realizing it, it is important that the people understand what we want for them and what are indeed their natural rights. Therefore, the slogan, "All power to the people," sums up our goals for Black people, as well as our deep love and commitment to them. All power comes from the people, and all power must ultimately be vested in them. Anything else is theft. Our complete faith in the people is based on our assumptions about what they require and deserve. The first of these is honesty. When it became apparent in the early days that the Black Panthers were a growing force, some people urged us to take either accommodating positions for small gains or a, quote, black line, based solely on race rather than economic or social strategy. These people were talking a black game they did not really believe in. But they saw that the people believed and that the black line could be used to mobilize them. We resisted. To us, it was both wrong and futile to deceive the people. Eventually, we would have to answer to them. In the metaphysical sense, we base the expression "all power to the people" on the idea of man as God. I have no other God but man, and I firmly believe that man is the highest or chief good. If you are obligated to be true and honest to anyone, it is to your God, and if each man is God, then you must be true to him. If you believe that man is the ultimate being, then you will act according to your belief. Your attitude and behavior towards man is a kind of religion in itself, with high standards of responsibility. It was especially important to me that I explore the Judeo-Christian concept of God, because historically that concept has had an enormous impact on the lives of Black people in America. Their acceptance of the Judeo-Christian God and religion has always meant submission and an emphasis on the rewards of life hereafter, as relief for the sufferings of the present. Christianity began as a religion for the outcast and oppressed. While the early Christians succeeded in undermining the authority and confidence of their rulers and rising up out of slavery, the Afro-American experience has been just the opposite. Already a people in slavery, when Christianity was imposed on them, the blacks only assumed another burden, the tyranny of the future, the hope of heaven and the fear of hell. Christianity increased their sense of hopelessness. It also projected the idea of salvation and happiness into the afterlife, where God would reward them for all their sufferings on this earth. Justice would come later, in the promised land. The phrase, "all power to the people," was meant to turn this around, to convince Black people that their rewards were due in the present, that it was in their power to create a promised land here and now. The Black Panthers have never intended to turn Black people away from religion. We want to encourage them to change their consciousness of themselves and to be less accepting of the white man's version of God, the God of the downtrodden, the weak, and the undeserving. We want them to see themselves as the called, the chosen, and the salt of the earth. Even before we coined the phrase, I had long thought about the idea of God. I could not accept the biblical version, The Bible is too full of contradictions and irrationality. Either you accept it and believe, or you do not. I could not believe. I have arrived at my understanding of what is meant by God through other means, through philosophy, logic, and semantics. My opinion is that the term God belongs to the realm of concepts, that it is dependent upon man for its existence. If God does not exist unless man exists, then man must be here to produce God. It logically follows then that man created God, and if the creator is greater than that which is created, then we must hold that man is the highest good. I can understand why man feels the need to create God, particularly in earlier periods of history when scientific understanding was limited. The phenomena that man observed around him in the universe sometimes overwhelmed him. He could not explain or account for them. Therefore, he created something in his mind that was greater than these phenomena, something that was responsible for the mysteries in nature. But I think that when man clings to the idea of a God, whom he has created and placed in the heavens, he actually reduces himself and his own potential. The more he attributes to God, the more inferior he becomes, the less responsible for his own destiny. He says to God, "I am weak, but thou art mighty," and therefore accepts things as they are, content to leave the running of the world to a supernatural force greater than himself. This attitude embodies a kind of fatalism, which is inimical to growth and change. On the other hand, the greater man becomes, the less his God will be. None of this means that I am completely hostile to the many beautiful and admirable things about religion. When I speak of certain aspects of society to black people, the use of religious phraseology flows naturally, and the audience response is genuine. I also read the Bible frequently, not only for its poetry, but also for its wisdom and insight. Still, much of the Bible is madness. I cannot accept, for example, the notion of divine law and responsibility to God. As far as I am concerned, if men are responsible beings, they ought to be responsible to each other. And so, when we say all power to the people, we mean to convey a sense of deep respect and love for the people, and the idea that the people deserve complete truth and honesty. The judgment of history is the judgment of the people. That is the motivating and controlling idea of our very existence. End of chapter 22.